The Marv's grocery store stood tall over the smaller buildings surrounding it. It was the heart that kept the town of Polk going. Everyone had a social media account, but anything worth knowing was learned in the aisles or lines of Marv's. Ava pulled into the parking spot next to the bench. The vehicle had barely stopped before the door flew open. She rushed towards the front of the store, but then stopped midway in her step. Going back to her car, she fished around in the back seats for a minute before emerging with her name tag. "Morning, Ava," called a voice from behind her. Sheriff David sat on the bench, waiting for his cup of coffee to cool. "Morning, Dave. You take your heart medication yet?" "Gonna take it with my coffee," raising the cardboard cup. "Don't forget this time." "Don't really understand how those pills are gonna stop another heart attack. I figure if my ticker's gonna give, then it's gonna give." "Well, let's just assume the doctors know what they're talking about." "You know, I want to go peacefully in my sleep like my grandpa," said Sheriff David, letting his words hang in the air. Ava had heard him tell the joke before, but decided to humor him. "Oh yeah?" replied Ava. "And not screaming like the passengers in his seat," said the sheriff, his laughter nearly causing him to lose his cup of coffee. Ava let out a slight chuckle as she walked up to the front of the store. "Good one, Dave, but I better get to it." "All right, well, have a good one," said Sheriff David with a wave. Ava suddenly felt cold walking into the store, being hit by a gust of cool AC air. She went into the back office and clocked in on the computer sitting at the desk. Getting her cash drawer from the store vault, Ava pulled up on Register 2. This had been her routine for the last 5 years. 6 hours a day, 5 days a week on Register 2. Then she got to go home and decide how to keep her grandmother's house afloat. She really needed to talk to Carl about getting more hours at work. Ruth stood at Register 1 reading a magazine from the rack. Ava figured that when you've been at the place as long as Ruth, you get to do pretty much whatever you want. "Look at this. Some billionaire named his kid after an airplane. Can you believe that?" said Ruth. "That is a terrible thing to do. Names are important. They should mean something," replied Ava, without looking up from her cash drawer. She was busy counting money and making sure her drawer matched last night's total. "Well, I guess that's what the rich do. They create the names that are going to be popular for the next 100 years. You ever think about how weird it is that everyone on Earth has a name?" said Ava, finally satisfied with her count. "No, but I guess you do. I mean, think about it. Every culture, group, or tribe that has existed names people. Sure, the rules and languages are different, but we all seem to universally agree people need names." Ruth thought about it for a moment, then responded, "Yeah, if we didn't have names for each other, I'd start calling people by different sorts of profanity, and then before you know it, we're all fighting in the Marv Isles." Ava chuckled at the thought of the town of Polk having a medieval battle at Marv's. However, the conversation was cut short as an elderly woman approached the front of the store. Ava waved and called over to her. "Good morning, Mrs. Winston." She pulled up her cart and began to unload her goods at Register 2. Ruth just went back to reading her magazine, appearing unconcerned with anything outside her register. Although the task was somewhat repetitive, Ava was good at being a cashier. She rarely made a mistake and people liked going to her lane. She was young, only 24 years old, and an optimist at heart. Those things alone gave her some natural charisma, but it also helped that she knew everyone's name who visited the Marv's grocery store. After checking out Mrs. Winston, she picked back up with Ruth. "Find anything else good in there?" "No, but I had a weird thought just now." "Oh yeah? I love weird," said Ava with a smile. "Not that weird. I was just thinking, I've never heard you call someone by the wrong name or even forget a name. Last week I almost called Sheriff David Dale, and I see him every morning." Ava shrugged. "Good memory, I guess." Ruth seemed to accept the answer and went back to reading. But that was not exactly the truth. Ava did not remember people's names. She just knew them. One time she called a customer by their name and they had never met before. She tried to play it off like she must have overheard it, but they didn't seem to buy it. At the end of the conversation, she was pretty sure that customer was freaked out, which made it all the more important to keep it hidden. It was her secret gift that was only useful in customer service. Ava would gladly trade it for the psychic ability to know the winning lottery numbers. However, her grandma's gift was something else. She was the real deal. Had nightly visions about the future and everything. People of Polk used to come to her grandma for advice all the time. Ava almost began to cry thinking about her, but pulled it together before anyone noticed. After her grandma passed, she had barely allowed herself to think about it. She had other problems to worry about now, like keeping the lights on in the house that she left her, and she was trying to save up for the property taxes. Ava still had no idea how she was going to make that happen, but it started by making more money at work. She saw Carl walk by her lane with a clipboard in his hands. Not that he really needed a clipboard for anything, Ava figured it made Carl feel important. And who was she to judge? People tell themselves all kinds of little lies to get by from day to day. "Hey Carl, got a sec?" said Ava with a wave. Carl stopped and looked back at her with a smile. "Sure, what's going on?" "Do you think you could get me a few more hours this week?" Carl's smile quickly turned to a frown, and she knew the answer without hearing it. "Ava, I don't have any extra hours to give right now. This place barely scrapes by as it is." Ruth, suddenly interested in the conversation, peeked above her magazine. "How is that possible? Feels like everyone is here all the time." "Yeah, everyone is here and no one is buying anything. Seems like the people of Polk go to that news store down the highway," said Carl defeatedly. "Place ain't got no soul," said Ruth, going back to her magazine. "Well, once I figure out how to sell soul to people, this place will be rolling in the money. And sorry, Ava." "No worries, I had to ask. Thanks." Carl went back to the office and closed the door. She never enjoyed asking him each week for more hours, but short of robbing a bank, it was the only option she had right now. "You know, I'm supposed to close tonight. Do you want to cover for me?" asked Ruth. "Sure thing," replied Ava, her spirit suddenly lifted from the slightly white tile floor. The day at Mars went by in much the same way many a shift had passed for Ava over the years. It was slow moments talking to Ruth about any idea that sprung to mind, followed by a rapid rush of customers needing to check out all at the same time. Typically, those moments would be accompanied with a joke about people gathering in the parking lot to coordinate their shopping. Then it would shift back to a slow, even pace, perfect for the kind of conversations to try and push the sun to the west. Looking up at the old Pepsi clock on the wall, Ava could see they had successfully made it to 4 p.m. "Hey Ruth, you're free to cut out now if you want me to cover for you." Ruth double-checked the cell phone in her pocket before beginning to pull her drawer from the register. "Yep, I've got a few things I need to do around the house," purposely keeping her explanation vague. "I don't think you should play poker, but thank you, Ruth," said Ava with a smile. "All right, well, I don't know what you mean, but have a good rest of your shift," said Ruth, turning off her register light and heading towards the back office. Ava knew Ruth was the kind of person who couldn't admit she was doing you a favor, but she respected her for it. You never felt like she was holding something over you. Ruth did things because she thought it was right. Shortly after Ruth left, Carl pulled up on Register 1 to help cover for the closing shift. He looked surprised for a moment to see Ava, but then quickly put together the pieces in his head without asking a question. Carl was nice and all, but they really didn't have anything to talk about other than work. They tended to keep the shift quiet, working through the customers that needed to do some last-minute shopping after getting off work. The extra traffic caused the last part of her day to go by quickly, with only enough time between transactions to throw away receipt paper or break open a coin roll in her drawer. As Carl was doing the final count of the store, Ava was preparing to put up her drawer and call it a day. Then she was pulled out of her count by Carl's voice. "Can you get one more customer before going?" "Sure, Carl," said Ava, somewhat annoyed that she would have to start over her count now. She looked up to signal the customer over to her line, but stopped short of waving her hand. A tall, thin man came up to her register with a young boy at his side. He wore a beaten-up, brown Outback hat and black vest that was too warm for the season. Her stomach instantly felt like it was doing somersaults trying out for the Olympic gymnastics team. She couldn't place it, but something was not right about this man. He dropped the items on her conveyor belt with little care or respect, and then quickly grabbed the boy's arm and pulled him towards the front of the register. "Evening," said the thin man, putting an uncomfortable emphasis on the V sound. Then Ava's eyes grew wide with why she was filled with fear. This man did not have a name. When she looked at him, her secret gift just came up blank, like looking at an unpainted canvas. It was empty, just like his eyes. Then she looked down at the boy, who refused to look up from the ground. His name was Johnny Harris. She could read him just fine. Everything screamed that he needed help, but she didn't know how to help. Ava decided she had to play it cool if she was going to do anything. She began to check out the thin man's items, but she could feel his eyes boring into her, unblinking and uncaring. He was buying a pack of steaks, duct tape, bleach, and extra-large garbage bags. Not suspicious enough to call the police, but it certainly did not make her feel any better. "So, what's your name, young man?" said Ava to Johnny, trying to force a smile. The boy began to look up, but then suddenly looked back down to avoid the glare from the thin man. "His name is Ben. He doesn't like to talk." Ava felt her skin crawl with the answer, but now she knew he was lying. But what could she do to prove it? "Is that your son?" asked Ava, still trying to pretend to be a happy-go-lucky cashier. However, the thin man didn't seem to buy the act. He just stood at the counter for an uncomfortably long silence, staring at her with cold, calculating eyes. "You like to talk a lot," said the thin man, at last breaking the silence. "Oh, well, didn't mean any harm by it, just talking. You're just talking for the sake of talking, huh?" "Yep, that is me," said Ava, trying to cool down the obvious tension in the air. "You ever think?" asked the thin man. "Ever think about what?" responded Ava, becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the tone the conversation had taken. "You ever think people want to know the day they're going to die? Or do you think it's kinder to let it be a surprise?" He leaned down towards her to close the distance and hide his eyes behind the brim of his hat, but she could still feel them staring at her, trying to measure her up and see how she would react to the threat. Ava's instinct told her that she couldn't show any weakness right now. "Your total is $29.86, shoving the bag into his hands and forcing him to grab it. The thin man kept his eyes on her, but it did force him to move a bit out of her space. A small victory. "You know, I got a cabin I'm renting out for the week. Why don't you come with me? We can have a party." "Hard pass. Now cash or card?" The thin man made an over-exaggerated shrug, then reached for his wallet. He set a 20 and a 10 on the counter and left without saying a word. He pulled the small boy by the arm as they exited through the store's automated doors. Ava knew this was a bad idea, but she needed to get his license plate. Everything inside her screamed that the boy Johnny was in a bad situation. She waited a moment, then crept towards the exit of the store, looking through the front window for his vehicle. A white van sat under the only broken light in the parking lot, making it impossible to see any defining details. In for a penny, in for a pound, thought Ava as she exited the store and started to walk towards the van. She was instantly hit with the humid, warm night air. The van did not appear to be running and no one was inside it. Suddenly she caught a glimpse of motion from her left, something hiding by the bench just out of direct sight. The thin man was stomping towards her with something in his hands. His face was contorted into an expression of pure rage. Ava's hair stood on edge and her muscles tightened, preparing for the fight. Just as the clash was about to begin, the moment was broken by Carl's voice. "Ava, you gotta balance your drawer before you head out." The thin man stopped a couple of steps short of reaching her. He looked back and forth at Ava and Carl, calculating the odds with the new element in play. A sinister smirk crept onto his face. It appeared that he still liked his odds. Ava took a couple of clumsy steps back, hitting her heel on the curb. However, the moment was once again cut short by another interruption. A sheriff patrol car pulled up into a business parking lot next to Marv's. The thin man tipped his hat and quickly marched towards his van. "What was that about?" asked Carl, scratching his head. Ava nearly collapsed onto the sidewalk as she tried to process the flood of emotions she was experiencing. Relief and fear clouded her thoughts, making it difficult to think about the next step. Instinctively, she moved back inside the safety of the store, with Carl following behind her. "Is everything okay?" asked Carl. Something about the response flipped a switch inside of Ava. No, everything was not okay. Johnny was still in danger. Ava ran back out into the parking lot, looking for the white van. However, it was long gone, and the thin man apparently not wasting any time to escape. The sheriff patrol car was gone as well, leaving only herself and a confused Carl at the front of the Marv's grocery store. "Yeah, it's fine," said Ava unconvincingly. She went back inside with Carl to finish closing the store. She'd periodically catch a glimpse of Carl looking at her, trying to gauge the situation. Ava wanted to explain everything, but she had no idea how to start. "I have an ability to know anyone's name that I meet, and I kept it secret my entire life. But tonight I met someone who had no name that I think is hunting people. I have no real evidence other than a creepy encounter in the parking lot, but just take my word on it." Yeah, she was certain that would go about as well as making a soup sandwich. The town of Polk was not a place that enjoyed having its worldview challenged. Ava allowed her mind to wander back to the encounter with the thin man. She was not aware that it was possible for people to not have names. Something about the line of thought triggered a memory she had misplaced. Her grandma had taken her out of school to go see her dad. She was about 7 or 8 at the time. She remembered being excited to see her dad, even if the state prison was a scary place. However, she kept fixating on a man at a table over who didn't have a name. Ava remembered her grandma kept looking over at him too while talking to her dad. When visiting time was over, Ava asked her grandma about the man with no name. She was focusing hard on trying to remember the exact words. "Does everyone have a name, Grandma?" "I guess you noticed him too," asked her grandma. Ava nodded her head as they walked away from the prison gates. "Well, almost everyone has a name. It's the bridge our soul uses to communicate with the physical world. But if you ever meet someone who doesn't have a name, you stay away from them, Sugar Bear." "Why?" "Because monsters don't have souls, and without a soul, they won't have a name." Ava decided she was heading over to Sheriff David's house tonight. Deputy Williams stepped out of his patrol car and walked towards the white van. He pulled them over for not coming to a full stop while passing by the stop sign near Marv's. Not a major issue, but the deputy wanted to make sure the driver was not intoxicated. Shining his light through the window, he could see an older, thin man and a young boy in the front seat. The thin man rolled down his window and smiled at the deputy. "What can I do for you, officer?" "License and registration, please." The thin man already had them in his hand, ready for the request. "Everything okay tonight?" asked the thin man. "You did not come to a full stop at the last sign you passed. Have you had anything to drink tonight?" "Never touch the stuff, officer. I like to keep my senses sharp. Plus, me and the boy have a fishing trip planned for tomorrow." This made the deputy relax a bit. Just a father-son trip, and Dad just got a bit too eager to get some rest before morning. He shined his flashlight towards the back of the van and saw a large tarp covering something with a dead deer on top of it. Something about the shape under the tarp looked familiar and put him back on edge. "What's in the back of the van?" said Deputy Williams. "Oh, just fishing gear." "Care if I take a look?" "Sure, but the power locks don't work. Care if I get out to unlock it?" "Yeah, that's okay," said the deputy, taking a step away from the door. The thin man got out of the car with his keys in hand. Once he was standing in front of him, it became clear that this guy was tall, at least over 6.5 feet, maybe just shy of 7 feet tall. He followed the man to the back of the van, keeping his eyes on him the entire time. Deputy Williams let his hand rest on the hilt of his pistol as he watched the man work to unlock the van. "See, just fishing gear," said the thin man, stepping away from the van. The deputy shined his light inside, but only saw the tarp. Moving past the thin man, the deputy removed the tarp and almost fell over from the shock. 2 pale corpses laid inside the van, their cloudy eyes unmoving and unresponsive. Deputy Williams drew his firearm and rotated towards the thin man, but some object stopped him from completing the turn. The thin man had already closed the distance and sunk a blade deep into his neck, a trail of blood rolling down the deputy's shirt. In one swift motion, he yanked the blade free, but did so at an angle to maximize the damage. Deputy Williams dropped his gun and fell backwards, clumsily holding his neck to stop the flow of blood. He tried to reach for his radio, but the thin man was on top of him with lightning speed, sinking the blade multiple times into any unprotected spots. The attack was chaotic and held little coordination. The thin man growled as he continued to put his switchblade to work. Once he was certain the deputy was dead, he grabbed his body off the asphalt and threw him into the back of the van. He picked up the gun and tucked it into the back of his pants. Grabbing and putting on a pair of work gloves, the thin man approached the patrol car. He turned off the engine and put it into neutral and pushed it off the road. The patrol car rolled slowly down the hill for a few feet before disappearing into a brush. The last thing he did was grab the deer carcass out of his van and placed it on top of the pool of blood on the road. Satisfied with his work, the thin man locked up his van and got back into the driver's side door. Johnny was crying in the passenger seat, obviously aware of what had just happened. The calm expression of the thin man suddenly morphed into a mask of unimaginable fury. "Shut up!" yelled the thin man at Johnny. Johnny was still crying, but he was holding back the sound now. The thin man started the van and continued his journey back to the cabin. Ava's car pulled onto the dirt road just on the outskirts of Polk. Dull lights could be seen dotting the hillside, the only sign that the rural area was not abandoned. She had to admit that it was a bit difficult trying to find the sheriff's place. The last time she had visited was over a year ago when her grandma had passed. The fact that it was night did not help things either. All the hills and roads looked foreign under the moonlight, like they had been twisted from their original forms. She had to remember to get his number from him when they talked. It'd be nice to call instead of making a late-night drive into the boonies. Now that she was thinking about it, Ava was not certain Sheriff David even had a phone. Finally spotting a road that looked familiar, Ava became more confident that she was on the right path. If her memory was correct, it should be just a couple of miles, and then the dirt trail would end at his mobile home. Now that she was a bit more confident about the way, Ava's mind began to meander back to her grandma. She would have known how to handle this. It felt like she knew everything. Sure, Ava sorta had the gift too, but it was not exactly the same. Her grandma could know the things that had yet to happen, and see into people. Ava could see people's names, and that was about it. She was pretty certain she got the discounted fire sale version of the gift. Her grandma never liked her talking negative about it. Used to say, even a spark in the right place can start a blaze. However, she always suspected that her grandma said that to make her feel better. But who knew? Maybe it'd be enough to help Johnny. The truth of the matter was that the gift appeared to be getting weaker and less common with every passing generation. As far as she knew, Ava was the last person in her family to have it at all. When Ava was young, her grandma used to tell her all the amazing things people in her family could do. According to the stories, the very first person to have the gift could heal the sick and bring people back from death's door. It was a rare and radiant gift that never repeated, and now all that was left was Ava and her parlor trick. Pulling up to the mobile home, Ava could see Sheriff David sitting on his porch. She let out a sigh of relief at the knowledge that he was still up. It felt better starting this strange conversation without waking someone up in the middle of the night. The sheriff stood up from his chair at the side of the vehicle. Ava pulled up near the stairs to the porch and turned off her engine. She got out and waved at him as she walked up the steps. Was it better to start out with some small talk or just jump right into it? Ava thought to herself. Ava, what brings you out here in the middle of the night? I thought you might still be asleep. Glad I'm not waking you up, said Ava nervously. I'm too old to sleep a full night, and sitting outside helps relax me. But I figure you came out here to talk to me about more than my sleep patterns. I'm going to tell you something crazy, and I need you to believe me. Do you trust me? Well, sure. What's going on? Said the sheriff with a bit more concern in his voice now. I think we got someone in town who's planning on hurting people, and I was hoping you could check it out, said Ava. Who is it? Well, this is the first time I've ever seen him. I think he's passing through town. He was driving a white Chevy van, maybe 2000-ish. Did you get the license plate number? Ava shook her head in disappointment and broke eye contact with David. Saying it all out loud, she realized she didn't have a lot of information. I couldn't see the plate. He parked under a broken light at Marv's, but he approached me in the parking lot like he was going to hurt me. A sheriff's car pulled up in the lot over and must have spooked him. Yeah, I think Williams is on patrol right now. Did he say anything to you that makes you think he's going to hurt you or someone else? This was the tricky part. How could she explain what she knew about this thin man to David? Would he believe her? I just got a bad feeling from him, like an intuition. I need more than that to start looking into this guy. Ava thought about it for a moment, trying to recall some specific detail about the encounter that would help. Then it dawned on her. She knew the boy's name. She could read him. He had a boy with him named Johnny Harris. I'm pretty sure that isn't his son, and he's going to hurt him, David. Okay, I tell you what. I'll radio for Williams to keep an eye out for the van, and why don't you come by the office tomorrow morning and you can put in a report. She could tell by his tone that he didn't understand the urgency of the situation. No, we got to go find him tonight. Johnny may not be around tomorrow. Ava, what are you holding back? How do you know this Johnny is in danger? A spark in the right place. Maybe he could believe her. I know that the thin man is a monster, the same way I know your real name isn't David. The sheriff and Ava stood in silence for a few agonizing moments. Okay, so what is my real name then? Asked the sheriff, a bit less dismissive in his tone now. I know your name is Elijah, which is a good name in my opinion. It fits you better than David. David fell back into his chair, the old gears in his mind spinning. Not a single soul left in Polk knew his real first name, and he never went by it. The last person to call him Elijah was his mother 20 years ago. He assumed that that part of him died with his mom, and suddenly having it resurrected left him speechless. It was like getting visited by a specter from the past. Somehow Ava must have found it online. That was the only thing that made sense. Look, it's late. I'm going to put Deputy Williams on it and come by my office in the morning. But we're not going to run around tonight looking for a white van on the roads. Ava was crushed by his dismissive words. She had expected him to believe her. They had always gotten along well over the years. But what did she expect? It was a big pill to swallow, and she did not exactly do a great job serving it up. All right, Elijah, I'll see you in the morning, shouted Ava as she hurried down the stairs and back into her car. Hearing her say the name left Sheriff David feeling uneasy, like she had just peered into his soul. He could tell she was upset with him, but this was the best course of action. As Ava pulled away from the mobile home, her mind began to put together a new plan. If she could not get the sheriff to help, well, she would just have to get Johnny on her own. The thin man did say he was staying at a cabin, and as far as she knew, the town of Polk only offered one rental cabin in the woods. She failed Johnny at the Marv's parking lot. She was not going to fail him tonight. If you enjoy this kind of content, consider liking the video. This helps with the YouTube algorithm, and it's the best way to support my work. If you'd like to hear part 2, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. As always, thank you for listening, and let me know in the comments the kind of stories you'd like to hear. Have a good one.